There is a version of Christianity that has made peace with things God never made peace with. It goes to church on Sunday, quotes scripture on social media, and genuinely believes it is following Jesus, all while practicing habits, attitudes, and behaviors that the Bible quietly, clearly, and consistently calls sin. This is not a video about the obvious failures. It is not about the people who walked away from faith or openly rejected God's commands. This is about the faithful, the regular attenders, the small group leaders and worship singers and Sunday school teachers who have slowly and without realizing it normalized things that grieve the heart of God. If you are willing to look honestly at your own life, this video might be one of the most convicting things you watch this year. The first behavior is worry and anxiety treated as personality traits rather than spiritual struggles. In modern Christian culture, anxiety has been so thoroughly normalized that many believers wear it like a badge of identity. "I'm just an anxious person," they say, as though that settles the matter. But the Apostle Paul, writing from a prison cell, commanded believers to be anxious for nothing and to bring every concern to God in prayer with thanksgiving. Jesus himself asked his followers plainly, "Which of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life?" This is not to minimize clinical anxiety disorders, which deserve care and compassion, but the habitual daily practice of worry, the endless mental rehearsal of worst-case scenarios, is something Scripture calls a failure to trust God. Christians have normalized it so thoroughly that choosing peace is now seen as naive, while choosing worry is seen as responsible. The second behavior is gossip dressed up as a prayer request. Every church has experienced this. Someone leans in with a lowered voice and says, "I just want you to pray for so-and-so, but let me tell you what they did." The information shared is detailed, damaging, and delicious, and it is wrapped in spiritual language so it feels acceptable. But Proverbs is not subtle on this point. It says a gossip betrays confidence and separates close friends. The New Testament lists gossip alongside sexual immorality and malice as behaviors that have no place among God's people. The test is simple. If the information you are sharing about another person would hurt them to hear and they are not part of the conversation, it is gossip regardless of how many prayer hands you add to the end of it. The third behavior is the love of money quietly renamed as financial wisdom. Jesus said more about money than almost any other topic in his ministry, and his words were stark. He said, "You cannot serve both God and money." He warned that the love of money is a root of every kind of evil. He told a rich young man to sell everything and follow him, and the man walked away sad because his possessions were too important. Modern Christianity has largely spiritualized wealth, treating financial prosperity as a sign of God's favor and the accumulation of more as simple prudence. But there is a deep difference between managing money wisely and loving it. When financial security becomes the primary goal of your life, when giving is the last line item in your budget instead of the first, when you would follow God anywhere as long as it does not cost you financially, something has replaced God on the throne of your heart. The fourth behavior is dishonesty in small things. Most Christians would never describe themselves as liars, but the same people who would never tell a major falsehood will routinely say they are fine when they are not, exaggerate stories to make themselves sound more impressive, call in sick when they are not sick, or give excuses instead of honest explanations. Jesus raised the standard on truth-telling to an almost uncomfortable level. He said, "Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." The early church was built on radical honesty. Believers were expected to put off falsehood and speak truthfully to each other because they were members of one body. A culture that has normalized the comfortable half-truth, the strategic omission, and the socially acceptable exaggeration has drifted far from what Christ called his people to. The fifth behavior is neglecting the poor and calling it minding your own business. The Old Testament is filled with God's furious rebukes toward Israel for ignoring the vulnerable among them. The prophets thundered about it. Jesus said that whatever you did not do for the least of these, you did not do for him. James, the brother of Jesus, wrote that faith without works is dead, and his primary example was someone who sees a brother or sister without food or clothing and says, "Go in peace, be warm and well fed," while doing nothing about their physical need. The church has produced generations of believers who are theologically informed, spiritually disciplined, and almost entirely disconnected from the poor, the hungry, and the forgotten in their own communities. This is not a political position, it is a biblical one. God's people have always been defined by their care for the most vulnerable. The sixth behavior is consuming entertainment that celebrates what God calls evil. There's a conversation almost no one wants to have in the modern church, but the Apostle Paul had it plainly. He wrote to the Ephesians that among God's people there should be not even a hint of sexual immorality, of greed, or of obscenity, let alone the entertainment that glorifies them. He told the Philippians to set their minds on whatever is true, noble, right, pure, and lovely. The average Christian today consumes hours of content each week that mocks marriage, glorifies violence, sexualizes everything in sight, and treats sin as entertainment, and then wonders why their spiritual life feels dry. What you feed your mind shapes what your heart desires. This is not legalism, it is how the human soul works, and Scripture has always known it. The seventh behavior is neglecting Sunday worship as a substitute for daily obedience. Perhaps no behavior is more normalized in the modern church than the compartmentalization of faith. Christianity becomes a Sunday activity, a weekend identity, a spiritual sector of an otherwise secular life. But the picture of discipleship in the New Testament looks nothing like this. Jesus said that if anyone wants to come after him, they must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow him. Daily. The early believers in Acts devoted themselves daily to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to prayer. Faith was not something they visited once a week. It was the organizing principle of their entire existence. When worship becomes a weekly performance rather than a daily posture of the heart, when attending church replaces actually following Christ, something essential has been lost, and it has been lost so gradually that most people haven't even noticed it's gone. The uncomfortable truth at the center of all seven of these behaviors is that sin does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly, makes itself at home, borrows your language, and wears your clothes until you can no longer tell the difference between the culture of Christ and the culture you were saved out of. The call of the gospel is not to a more religious version of ordinary life. It is to a transformed life, one that looks different, costs something, and points, however imperfectly, towards the character of Jesus. The good news is that recognizing where you have drifted is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of the way back.